Welcome to Shom Machshava on the Daf. Shir sponsor Lui Nishma Sam Yakashom Le'Abbas Yitzchok. We're holding on Metzia Daf Yud Beis. The Gemara on the Taba Yud Beis brings Reb Chia bar Abba and the name of Rabbi Yochanan that says a very fundamental concept. Loi Gadol Gadol Mamish, Loi Katan Katan Mamish. Gadol doesn't necessarily mean an adult, and Katan doesn't necessarily mean a child. Ela Gadol v'samuch al shulchan aviv zehu Katan. A Gadol who relies on his father, he is considered to be a Katan. Katan ve'eino samuch al shulchan aviv zehu Gadol. A child, but he is independent, he's a Gadol. Meaning, the Gemara here is establishing the definition of a Gadol is independence, someone who's standing on his own. And the definition of a Katan is someone who is dependent on somebody else. This concept is used a lot in Torah Samachshav, and we'll bring a few examples to this. So first, the Maharal in Sefer Netzach Yisrael Perek and Beis, when he speaks about the fact that Avraham Avinu, the Gemara tells us in Psachim that he called Beis Hamikdash Har, a mountain. So explains the Maharal, because a Har always means something large, something big. And Avraham Avinu is called a Gadol. Says the Maharal, why? Shemitas Avraham u'mitas ha'chesed, ve'achesed midamet kehar lefika shekol chesed hu Gadol. Chesed is compared to a mountain because chesed is Gadol. Why is chesed Gadol? So my father Shlita on the footnotes on this Maharal goes on to explain like this. The Maharal himself always defines what is chesed. Chesed is when someone gives something to somebody else for no reason at all. That's famously what the Maharal writes, the difference between chesed and rachamim. Chesed is someone just giving to somebody else because of the good of his heart. Rachamim is when someone sees someone else in need, he has mercy and he gives him what he needs. So very big difference. Why is the first person giving? Why is the second person giving? The first one is giving because of his own independent feeling. The second one is giving not because of what he wants to do, but because he sees someone in need, so that brings out what he wants to do. So if so, chesed means someone who's completely independent. He doesn't depend on any other things that cause him to do something. He does it on his own. He's the initiator. And this is based on our Gemara, that someone who's independent, Katan ve'eino samuch shulchan aviv zehu Gadol. The definition of independence is Gdula, and Chesed means someone who's independent on his own feeling. That's why Baal Chesed is called Gadol. When we call Kodesh Baruch Hu Akel Gadol, a Gibor v'Noira, Gadol say Chazal, so Midas Tuvoy, that's Midas HaChesed. In the Sefer Pardes Yosef, in Parshas Bereshis, he says that when he spoke to the Ger Rebbe, referring to the Imre Emes, he told him an idea, and then he found that the Bnei Yissaschar says it in Chodesh Nisan Ma'amar Gimel. Why is the Shabbos before Pesach called Shabbos HaGadol, the big Shabbos? What's the reason for it? So explains Bnei Yissaschar. We know that there's a difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. Who makes Yom Tov into Yom Tov? Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael mekachel his money. But Shabbos Bereshis stands on its own. Am Yisrael don't make it Kaddish, it stands on its own. So it comes out, the Muyadim depend on Am Yisrael, and Shabbos stands on its own. Before we get to Pesach, the first Moed of Am Yisrael, we want to come and emphasize the chiluk, the difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. So Shabbos, we call it Shabbos HaGadol, the big Shabbos. The Shabbos which is independent, keneged the Yom Tovim that will come soon. And especially the Pesach is called also Shabbos, Mimochar Shabbos. Meaning Pesach does have the name of Shabbos, but that's not Shabbos HaGadol. It's not independent Shabbos. It's a Shabbos which depends on Am Yisrael. So when we have the Yom Tov, which is called Shabbos, before that comes the regular Shabbos Bereshis. I call that Shabbos HaGadol, the independent Shabbos, Gadol, ki eino samuch shulchan acher. And we'll conclude that there's a story with the Vilna Gaon that's brought down in different versions in different places. In Kovetz Yeshurun, Chelik Vov, it's brought in from the Sefer Shevis Yosef, that once the Vilna Gaon was traveling, and he got to a place that the Balabais was Tamil Chacham, and he saw that the Vilna Gaon was somebody special. So he opened the Chumash and he told him, this was the Chumash of my late father, was a big Tamil Chacham. And he wrote on the pasuk, "It's Shnei HaMe'oros HaGedolim." which refers to the sun and the moon, he wrote a Rosh Tevos that nobody is able to understand. The Rosh Tevos are Gimel Vov Ayin Shin Aleph Nun Kuf. So the Vilna Gaon says, I'll tell you what the Rosh Tevos are. Gadol v'samuch al shulchan aviv nikra Katan. And he explained, he's coming to answer a question. The Gemara in Chulin has a stira. And one hand it says, the two big lights, sun and the moon. On the other hand it says, Amora Gadol v'Amora Katan, that the sun is called Amora Gadol and the moon is called Amora Katan. So it's a contradiction. So the answer the father is alluding to, the Alpi Pshat, you can explain, yeah, the sun and the moon are both called the big lights. But the reason the sun is called Gadol and the moon is called Katan, because compared to the sun, the moon is Katan. Because the sun has its own light, it's independent. It's Gadol ve'eino samuch al shulchan acherim. It's on standing on its own. But the moon, even though it's a big light, but because it's all that it gets is a reflection of the sun, doesn't have its own light, it depends on others, so that's why it's called a Katan. And in Pardes Yosef that we mentioned before, he brings the same word, the name of the Sefer Bris Shalom. All the Maramikoimis are in the attached source sheet. Anyone who wants to join the Shomachshava email list to WhatsApp group, please email shomachshava@gmail.com.